Hi, I'm Anuj Bandari.
And I'm Melissa Centeno.
We are with Restorative Justice Initiative, a nonprofit organization that is building a community of New Yorkers who reflect the diversity of our city to expand healing and non-punitive responses to harm at the personal, neighborhood, and systemic levels.
Within our organization, we have a phenomenal group of young people called the Youth Advocacy Council that collaborates to promote and share restorative practices across New York City, envisioning a landscape where young people across schools and communities understand their role in building a restorative community.
For the last 2 years, this specific group of talented young people has developed skills as restorative circle keepers, advocates in their communities, and storytellers who are able to bridge the communication gaps that they see on the day-to-day, not only within their student communities, but across the different ages, abilities, and expressions within New York City at large. I coordinate training, programming, and youth work at Restorative Justice Initiative.
I am a restorative justice practitioner, youth organizer, social worker, and book lover who, alongside Anuj, worked with New York Public Library staff in 2022 and 2023 to think together about the integration of restorative practices in libraries. We hope that restorative practices can support communities in defining and redefining crucial values of our lives, such as safety and belonging, together. Doing this is essential in making sure that community safety and well-being is held by the people and is supported in dynamic ways that can support growth and change along the way. This includes a variety of needs across health and ability, whether offering masks for those who feel safer with them, to thinking about the physical accessibility of your library.
In this video, we will aim to do 3 things. The first is to understand what restorative practices and restorative justice are, and why they can be an important tool in libraries supporting the mental well-being of young people. The second is to share tools of restorative practices and what they offer in terms of building a deeper community. And finally, we will think together about what these tools can look like when implemented in a library setting. Restorative practices are a collection of indigenous community practices intended to build stronger relationships, deepen communities, and to provide skills that enable community to hold and respond to conflict together. Restorative justice specifically refers to the implementation of these practices as an alternative to our traditional justice system, in order to, as the name suggests, move towards justice. For both Melissa and myself, our version of justice means making small steps daily towards a world without prisons and policing. Ourselves and others in the restorative movement understand this as an abolitionist way of moving through the world. Restorative justice offers an approach to harm that is rooted in deeply understanding one another's humanity and utilizing that understanding to figure out what we need to transform the present harm. An explicit shift from the use of isolation, punishment, and exclusion that our current justice system has traditionally relied on.
These practices are unique in that rather than working toward a narrative that aims to get a single truth and name people as good and bad or right and wrong, they're an invitation to listen to the feelings and experiences of a community and to understand how uniting over a value that is being challenged or disrupted can transform those feelings and those experiences for the better. Restorative practices at large envision storytelling as a part of what justice can be, and ask those on all sides of an experience, whether it be in conflict or not, what their needs are and what supports could exist to better care for them. We know that envisioning these qualities across the entire world at once can seem daunting. The necessity for this work is in understanding that each time we build a smaller community space where people can feel cared for, visible, and are able to learn and grow, even if that space is temporary, we are actively building skills together to inform the next iteration of a more just world. Now, we would love to introduce 2 of our YAC members, Juzette and Leanne.
Thanks, Melissa. I'm Juzette, and my pronouns are she, her, hers.
I'm Leanne. I use they, them pronouns.
And we are members of the Youth Advocacy Council at Restorative Justice Initiative. If we take a look at libraries, we can understand that they play quite a unique role in our communities. There are not many intergenerational spaces that can both bring communities together and that are supported by resources.
If we understand restorative practices as tools that support an active building of tight-knit communities that might reflect what we can achieve in the world at large, then it's clear that our libraries serve as a significant and beautiful small community within which restorative practices can transform lives, impact community, and provide a safer space for people to connect with themselves and one another.
We live in a society where we often can't sit somewhere outside of our homes without feeling like we can be seen as a problem. This phenomenon happens quite often to young people. Most of our public spaces are not ones where people can arrive and simply be.
The fact that there are so many places that have socialized our community members to be thought of as a challenge or an issue upon entry, rather than as a human being who is seeking belonging, knowledge, resources, or community, is one of the reasons why we feel excited to advocate for restorative practices within our library systems. This is also why libraries can serve as an example of what other gathering spaces in our communities can look like. Spaces where people are able to be supported, or people can understand and have clear expectations of how they may be able to show up and give to a community, and where people do not have to be afraid to state their needs and curiosities.
One of the most commonly used restorative practices is the circle. In understanding restorative justice roots within indigenous communities across the globe, we can also take a look at the circle as a reoccurring pattern. In our natural world, us individuals have the opportunity to replicate and model how we gather in ways that can break the hierarchies that we may live under in the day-to-day world. The idea of a circle is that it's a place where we can practice how we might be able to live with one another in our communities. Essentially, circles offers an opportunity to practice the world we wish to move towards. The circle is also a symbol of community's needs to return to itself, to reconnect with itself, and to re-energize itself.
Oftentimes, when we come into conflict, or if there are things in our communities that need to be talked about, there are no resources at the ready for a community to support itself and engage in collective learning. This is not because those resources do not exist. In fact, a fundamental notion within restorative practices is that everything we need to create positive change is already here and available to us.
What if there was an understanding that the experiences and stories within your library were all you needed to envision a better future? What kind of magic would we be able to unlock?
We offer restorative justice circles as a tool that can be used to deepen community with all who come into your library. This can happen by developing continual cohorts of programs, book clubs, student groups, and circles can even be used across staff meetings.
Thanks, Leanne and Gisette. Restorative circles have 7 parts that we're going to be touching on today. A talking piece, a centerpiece, an opening and grounding moment to build relationships, community agreements, question rounds, consensus building, and a closing. Each of these parts is essential to developing interpersonal skills that can help build a stronger community. Skills that libraries can use to support the development both in and out of circle processes.
The talking piece is a token, totem, or symbolic object that is passed around the circle. It represents each person's opportunity to speak and a signal that the rest of us in the space are accountable to being active listeners. Whereas many conversations take place with crosstalk or listening to react, the talking piece encourages us to listen first and foremost, to deeply understand one another. Given that restorative justice processes are consent-based processes, the option to pass is always available to participants, and if you choose to pass, we can still acknowledge your presence and your humanity as you hold the talking piece and pass it within the circle. I like to think of the passing of the talking piece as a continual movement of the circle's energy across its participants. With the talking piece, we assure the visibility of each person's humanity in a space. In a library, we can also adopt practices such as simply greeting community members when they enter our space that say, "We see you and we care about you."
The centerpiece is some kind of larger symbol that exists at the center of our circle that can be a representative of why we all have gathered, what unites us, or even a place for participants to rest their eyes if eye contact while sharing or storytelling is uncomfortable. From mandala fabrics and maps to books and collections of pictures and images, a centerpiece can be comprised of and can include many different things, and can also be built by everybody participating. Building a centerpiece can also be a moment for participants in a circle to build relationships. For example, one common practice is to write down personal values on circular pieces of paper, like a paper plate, and then offer them to the center of the circle to build something communal together. If there is a wall or a space in your library that could use a little bit more love or beautification, turning one of those spaces into a centerpiece for the library as a whole could be a great way to get community members both thinking about community and listening to one another. Try offering a question of the month, like, what does community sound like to you? Or, what is the most beautiful thing you have ever learned from reading? You can use a public space where community members can post their responses through art, through writing for each other to see.
An opening and relationship building moment allows us to commence the start of our circle together. Giving time and space for an opening and relationship building round is essential to the strength of a circle. As an opening, you can share a song or a poem, facilitate a meditation or a writing activity. For relationship building, there are some initial questions that are low stakes, fun, or even a one-word response that allows us to start engaging the talking piece and ground in the space together with each other. While restorative justice circles can be used to respond to conflict and harm, they can also be used proactively to build and strengthen community outside of the context of harms. Ultimately, everything we practice in a circle is to support us in building stronger relationships. When we talk about this in terms of our openings, we are simply referring to the way a community may be set up for people to form their own relationships.
Offering public programming for youth to come together and to connect with each other is a way to build community relationships that then strengthen the fabric of a library itself. When our program centers on the act of sharing oneself with another, rather than didactic teaching, we grow responsibility to each other and to the spaces we are in. Oftentimes, when we are out in the world, we don't get to choose the rules that we're asked to abide by. A characteristic that distinguishes restorative practices from other practices that we might see out in the world is that the participants themselves have stake in defining what accountable community looks like. We do this through building community agreements, a set of behaviors and expectations that represent how we might want to treat one another both in and out of circle.
A way to connect relationship building to the development of community agreements is to start by asking about a personal value that participants hold close in their lives. Once people have shared that, the next step is to ask what that value looks like in action and how it can be demonstrated via behaviors. When we build an understanding of the values that drive our actions, it helps us understand and care about the impact of our behaviors in the world. From there, we can start thinking about community agreements that we can buy into together, rather than community agreements that simply serve one or two people in our community, or even simply serve those who traditionally have held power in that community.
The goal is not 100% compliance or perfection, but rather a foundation that everybody has agreed to that we can come back to in times of friction. We recommend having your library agreements and values visible in your space. Having these allows them to be a point of conversation, reflection, and reference. Let's hear once again from Gisette and Leanne, who will discuss restorative realities, stories, and our future.
Once we have constructed community agreements, we're able to take the circle into question rounds. When we think of question rounds, we think of the power of possibilities that can emerge when a community is holding unknown questions together. These questions can allow us to take stock of the realities of what may exist around us, to share experiences and stories of what you've impacted and how we show up in the world today, and to envision a future that can be inclusive to all of us.
One of the things that makes restorative circles so unique is that the questions they pose are not intended to put people in opposition to one another. Rather, they're intended to have participants gather around a common value, theme, or topic that everybody can connect to. When we think about restorative justice circles outside of conflict, We can also understand that any pressing topic we want to talk about in community also likely relates to some community value that is important to the collective's health. When we're able to use conversations around the health of something that our community cares about, we're able to use the skills and knowledge around the circle to be able to carve a pathway forward. We see this same pattern with why people come to the library in the first place, to seek knowledge in community that may not be found otherwise.
The last two parts of a circle we want to touch on are the commitments and closing. We do our community circle as a circle because we understand that it takes an entire community to create sustainable transformation. If needed, there's often a round in a circle process where each person has the opportunity to name how they might want to bring forward the future that was envisioned within the question rounds. In the context of hurt and harm, participants identify what responsibility they will take on to transform the community's experiences. Circle processes believe that we must take care of the energy that we open up as we close our time together, and so closing, not unlike an opening, is typically done to be able to close that space.
We encourage folks to think of a community circle topic that they may feel comfortable initiating in their own library, as well as with members of your library community who may be partners with you in expanding this work. We often say that this work gets to grow strongest where relationships already exist.
What does the public library look like to you that is set up to respond to the human need to belong? Having spaces like these is particularly significant for young folks throughout their development because of feelings of belonging, a healthy relationship to the self, and critical thinking skills that develop consideration of others in community. In addition, restorative practices are practices that are both high in expectations and high in support.
Oftentimes when we only have high expectations without any human-centered support behind it, what we end up with is a sense of vigilance that prevents us from accessing our own learning and growth as well as connection to others. When we have high support but no expectations, we miss out on an important opportunity to develop a sense of accountability to one another. What restorative practices strive to do is envision community where we are both accountable to one another and non-disposable in our humanity.
This combination is also what young people need to be able to grow and learn. Anuj and Melissa will now discuss what a restorative library can be like.
We know that while Circle is a central part of restorative practice, it certainly is not our only way to embed a sense of community within our libraries. While Circle teaches us explicit ways to develop interpersonal skills together, the way a library is set up is able to give softer messaging around how stronger community can be developed. We have a few ideas for you to where Circle practice and some of these other ideas can begin. One of our foundational recommendations for integrating restorative practices in the culture of a library is to use the practices of Circle between library staff. When a group of people working together to support a mission-driven space are building deeper relationships themselves, those relationships can extend out into how the space is being built and how the space feels itself. A restorative library can be inclusive, where people arrive and are greeted in ways that indicate that they belong, where there are opportunities to connect with new people and there are resources to broaden an understanding of the self and others, and where people can be a part of decision-making processes and to see those decisions reflect back into community.
All to say, if each staff member at a library feels visible, human, and supported, then that support can extend out to all those who come to your library as well. Since libraries pose a specific challenge in community building, in that each day presents a new group of people, both new and returning, having a consistent practice across staff ensures that there is a place of consistency for those practices to be embraced. Circles can also be a model through which programming, especially programming for young people, can take place. In a circle, we often use questions to think about our relationships to the world around us, how those relationships show up in our own life stories, and what that means for the future. Turns out, some of these curiosities are some of the same ones that tie people to loving their favorite books and stories. A restorative library can be safe, where people know community expectations and values as well as their meanings, where there is ample space to reflect on feelings and experiences, and where there is space from traditional notions of safety, such as policing, so that communities can define what makes them feel safe on their own terms.
Having reading groups that come together around books or even spaces to process community and happenings in the world around us can be a great space to start utilizing Circle tools. We recommend having a set place in your library where Circle can be set up. This is a space that people can grow familiar with and also to be able to utilize on their own, not only in times of structured programming. A restorative library can be transformative, a place where community can grow their relationships, have their needs heard and resources offered to respond to them, and even develop leadership skills to be able to go on and lead the greater community, like through community conversations and circle keeping, so that the essence of curiosity and generosity within a library can pour outside of its walls.
We understand libraries as a profound place to harness opportunities for youth to experience a community in which they are both responsible and cared for, a combination that is transformative when it comes to mental well-being. We see restorative practices as a set of tools that allow us to unleash the possibilities of a dynamic community space. While these practices appear in a circle, there are ways that each can be practiced simply in the setup of a library.
If we can make the public spaces we have left ones that can model a healthy path to change, we are actively building new possibilities for the world around us, possibilities that could be instrumental to the lives of young people at your library.
On behalf of Anuj, Juzette, Leanne, and myself, thank you for watching.